Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update. Nicole, borderline Category 1 hurricane at this hour, still classified as a tropical storm. 70-mile-per-hour winds sustained. Today is Wednesday, November the 9th, 2022. 14 named storms so far this year, Nicole being the 14th. It has been 17 years since Florida has had 2 hurricane landfalls in one season. Nicole expected to become a Category 1 storm before making landfall later tonight along the east coast of Florida. That was 2005 with Dennis and Wilma. Both made landfall in Florida as major hurricanes. This time around, this year, 2022, it was Ian as a Cat 4 and will be Nicole as a Category 1. There are 21 days left in the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. Some other notable historical aspects of this system is it's been a long time since hurricanes made landfall in November in Florida. The last time along the Panhandle was Kate 37 years ago, back in 1985, and the last time the peninsula had a landfalling hurricane in November was 87 years ago. It was named 7 back in 1935. All right, here's a look at our storm right now. Nicole, 70-mile-per-hour winds moving due west at 12 miles per hour. Pressure steadily has been dropping, although not dropping significantly, but going on the downward trend. 985 millibar. That sustained wind, 70 miles per hour, really concentrated right around the core. The wind energy is spread out over a enormous distance. It's expanding that all the way out, up 400 or 500 miles from that storm center. You'll find tropical storm force winds. All right, here's how it looks on water vapor imagery. This is the mid-level dry air depicted by the yellows and rust colors off to the south. Moisture-rich air in the mid-levels. Closer to that storm center here, you're seeing off to the north with the blues and whites. There certainly is some dry air intrusion off to the south, and some of that has been getting pulled into the circulation, which is why we haven't seen this rapidly intensifying over the last 24 hours or so. You can also see this on visible satellite imagery. You can see the clearing skies down to the south with the drier air, and some of that dry air getting pulled on in with a dry tongue lifting north and trying to get pulled into that center of circulation. Now, there was a special advisory just a little while ago from the National Hurricane Center that highlighted the first landfall of Nicole over Great Abaco in the Bahamas. Does that area sound familiar? If you're watching from the Bahamas, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Back in 2019, this was the area that Dorian moved over, made landfall, and then stalled as a Category 5 storm. Of course, Nicole is no comparison to that. It is much, much weaker. Barely a Category 1 storm at this time, not even yet officially, but a high-end tropical storm, but moving over the same general area. Elbow Cay was where the official landfall location was for Dorian in the Bahamas. All right, now we turn on local radars here from Melbourne and Jacksonville, and National Weather Service radars here along the east coast of Florida, and we're just starting to see the outer core of Nicole move into radar range. There's not a ton of moisture with Nicole at this time, at least. More squally type activity building onshore, moving in from the northeast, pushing to the southwest. Certainly some tropical downpours there, but I don't think this is going to be a monumental rainmaker by any means. It's really a ginormous wind machine. Here's a look at that wind field currently as of the latest advisory from the Hurricane Center. We've got tropical storm force winds, 39 miles per hour or greater, extending out in this giant, what looks to be like a kidney bean. All that wind is off to the north of that center. Not much wind being found to the south there. It's kind of lopsided and asymmetrical. But off to the northwest, 360 miles those winds extend out. But look at to the northeast, 400 miles. So overall, that wind field is 500-600 miles in diameter in this gigantic lobe here. And those winds have already moved onshore, despite the center still being about a little less than 200 miles off to the east of the east coast of Florida. Those winds have already moved onshore, as I mentioned. Here's a look at some recent wind gusts. At the current time, we're not seeing tropical storm force, although just below it, you need 39 miles per hour or greater. KHOU Beach at 38 miles per hour. But something also of note here is how large the waves that are being generated from Nicole are. 23-foot waves just offshore here of KHOU Beach. Earlier I saw a plot of 31-foot waves, so a huge wind field being stretched all the way to the north. Look at Jacksonville, tropical storm force wind gusts there, and the waves are getting very, very high all the way up through the Outer Banks in North Carolina. So the wind field is massive, causing major waves, coastal erosion, rip current risk, and a lot of this wind is coming, most of this wind is coming onshore, meaning it's piling up along the coastlines, and that's why that storm surge threat is present. So I mentioned this would be likely the second hurricane to make landfall in Florida in the same season since 2005. So let's look back and compare the wind fields from our first storm of the season, the Category 4 Ian that made landfall back in September. So it's very interesting here when you compare the two. Ian was a much stronger storm, a Category 4. That wind energy was not as spread out. It was much more concentrated closer to the core, where winds was well over 100 miles per hour. And then you look at Nicole, where that wind energy is spread out over a huge area, not so much concentrated near the center. But there's both of them comparison along the southwest coast of Florida for Ian, along the east coast of Florida for Nicole, with impacts already being felt there. Here's the official track from the National Hurricane Center. Not much more intensification is expected here. Another jump of 5 miles per hour will put it as a Category 1 hurricane, which is where it's expected to peak just ahead of landfall later on tonight into the early morning hours of Thursday. As it pushes towards the coast, it's going to pick up more of a northwesterly turn and then come inland, move overland, and then potentially even emerge offshore into the Gulf of Mexico before making a secondary landfall. That's a possibility, but not a guarantee. If it stays over land, it's weaker. Maybe it has a little brief burst of reintensification here off the coast of Big Bend of Florida, right there at 50 miles per hour by tomorrow evening. And then it lifts north, gets picked up by an incoming cold front, picks up its forward speed, rocketing up along the eastern seaboard, the spine of the Appalachians, rains itself out, and also brings a severe weather threat to the Carolinas and Virginias. So perspective on the size of the wind field, 460 miles, we'll say generally, is the diameter of that tropical storm force wind field. You can take it from Houston all the way up to Lubbock in Texas, and that's the extent of where you'd find tropical storm force wind. So it's really a massive wind field. Already onshore now. Notice as we play it out in time, there's that forecast cone. So again, I've said this in every video we've done so far on Nicole. This is a classic example of impacts being felt way outside of the cone. A lot of times people say, well, I'm outside of the cone, things should be okay. Not the case, and this should be what you look back on. Look at the size of the wind field all the way up to Savannah, Georgia when it makes landfall in the central eastern seaboard of Florida. All watches have now been upgraded to warnings, meaning that the window in which to prepare has now closed. Hurricane warnings up for most of the east coast of Florida, stretching north, tropical storm warnings, Georgia and South Carolina coastlines, and even on the west coast of Florida, because we'll have the onshore winds wrapping around as the storm makes landfall. Storm surge impacts here, as well as gusty winds, tropical storm warnings back over to the Tampa Bay area, down to Fort Myers, areas that were impacted by Ian just a month or so ago, month and a half ago. So let's talk about that storm surge risk. The risk is there for up to 5 foot of storm surge inundation above dry ground in the areas here under the warning, which stretches all the way from West Palm Beach all the way up to the Georgia coastline just south of Savannah, where it's currently a warning. This will be exacerbated by astronomically high tides. We just came off a full moon a couple days ago, so we have king tide situation there that'll add to the higher than normal tidal cycles. A high tide later on this evening will be high, as well as tomorrow morning will likely be the big problem time frames for the highest storm surge totals. Off to the north, Savannah and Charleston under a storm surge watch there. As we get a little bit closer, these will likely also be upgraded to storm surge warnings. And as I mentioned there, where they're under a tropical storm warning, also a storm surge warning just north of Tampa for the wraparound effect from the storm drawing winds onshore there. I'm going to show it to you here. Here's Futuretrack, right now located over Great Abaco in the Bahamas as its first landfall, Nicole. This showing a lot of moisture with it. We're not really seeing that come to fruition on radar, though, but certainly some rain, a couple inches expected. Here we are by 4 a.m. Thursday morning, likely between 2 and 5 a.m. We're looking at a landfall along the east coast of Florida. This particular model brings it near the Palm Bay area south of Cape Canaveral. So anywhere to the north of that storm center will be dealing with onshore winds, greatest storm surge risk. Daytona Beach, Melbourne area, Jacksonville, all the way up to St. Augustine as well, and even points north of there up to Savannah, Georgia. So it's over land now, but notice the winds here starting to wrap around, so we're getting an onshore flow turning over towards Tampa, going out farther into Thursday early afternoon. Here it is right along the coastline, straddling the coastline near Horseshoe Beach along the Big Bend of Florida. We're getting the winds onshore here, so greatest storm surge risk will then turn to the Florida's west coast Thursday afternoon. It lifts north now into parts of western Georgia, near Atlanta, And at this point in time, when it's overland, this area, the Virginias, the Carolinas, need to look out for the potential of some severe weather on the outermost bands pivoting on shore. We can get some spin-up tornadoes here. Systems that move overland are notorious tornado producers, especially if you get these outermost bands that are building into a warm, moist, unstable environment like it's looking to be here. And then it lifts north along the spine of the Appalachians, and all of that tropical moisture gets rained out along it. So flash flooding threat is certainly there. We could see 3 to 6 inches of rain in some areas, stretching all the way up in New England. Talked about the severe weather threat. So here's the outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, giving it from a scale of 1 to 5 likelihood of storms that develop becoming severe. And in this case scenario, the tornadic threat would be a little bit higher. So we're at a level 2 here in all coastal locations for tomorrow. That then spreads north into the Carolinas and in the southern portions of Virginia by Friday, and likely even farther out in time up into the mid-Atlantic regions. Let's talk rainfall impacts now. We showed you this yesterday. Not very impressive rainfall totals, 1 to 3 inches mainly throughout most of Florida, maybe some locally higher totals than that. But then as it builds inland, all of this spreads to the north, and as it moves up along and banks up against the Appalachians, we'll see that rain out. So mountainous areas there could see anywhere from 3 to 6 inches, and that extends all the way up in upstate New York and portions of southern New England. So my final thoughts here, Nicole now likely entering a period of intensification, minimal though. About 5 more miles per hour to make it up to a Category 1 storm. Impacts are felt well outside of the cone, as we've already been seeing, and it's not just Florida, but all the way up the eastern seaboard that will be dealing with impacts from Nicole for the next 3 to 4 days. All right, that's the latest on Nicole. If it does indeed become a hurricane before landfall, we'll do another video for you later this afternoon and evening. But until then, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and also on TikTok at Tim Talk Weather. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. We'll see you again on Thursday.